can see here in our demo expression, we have several input ports, several output ports. Our output ports are where the expressions are used. We'll start initially with the isLeapYear function. We can double click anywhere and open up our main edit transformations prompt. Now, as you can see, we've got a port name defined, data type, which is going to be very important here for some of these functions, and especially the expressions, which is clearly the meat and potatoes of each function within a toolbox. If we look at the isLeapYear function, we can see that this FyghtSoft function is_leapyear accepts one parameter. This accepts an integer parameter or integer argument, and will return what Informatica refers to as a flag, which is either a 1 or a 0, since it cannot handle a false or a true response. You'll notice that the data type here is small integer, which is the output type of this port. It can also be integer, double. It cannot be, as that is defined by holding more of a byte range than a small integer or an integer. The next one is the isValid email address function. By editing the properties of this, we can see that we're passing in the input email address port, which is coming from our HR employees table, which does provide an email address. And if you've already run this, the workflow, you'll see that there are email addresses that fail. Please reference the user and developer guide for more information on how specific the valid email address function is. The next one is the string contains function. The string actually does a find, basically taking the first argument, which is referred to as the base string, and compares it to the second argument, which is more of the search criteria. And in this case, if ER provided here as a string is found anywhere in the base string or argument 1, then this will return a 1 for true, otherwise a 0 for false, and again represented as a data type, a small integer for the 1 or a 0 return value. The next is palindrome. A palindrome is a word or precisely a word or name character that is spelled the same forward as it is backwards. This specific function is handy in several different aspects of research, etc., and it accepts one argument. I do believe that for the demo, it's basically referencing the first name field from the HR employees database table during this demo. The next one is a very handy function which really breaks away from typical length functions that are provided with Informatica, and that is the word count functionality or word count function. And this takes in one argument, so specifically great uses for this would be a field column for something as a summary or a description, and this will return an integer value of the actual word count within that column or within that argument. This does return an integer, and the integer is actually the number of words within the argument. The words are defined by a space. That is the only characteristic for the expression test within the workout function. If there are multiple spaces, multiple blank spaces, then that has the ability to be counted as a word, but definitely a very useful function. The next one is the URL encode decode function. You'll see it here listed twice, and the reason for that is the URL encode decode function is basically an overloaded function which has the ability to both encode a URL or encode a URL string for the URL encoding standard, and it can also take that URL encoded string within the same function by passing it a different value for the second argument, and it can decode the string. So we'll take a look at both of those options. Here we see the URL encode decode string utilizing the second argument of encode. This does have to be specified in order to differentiate between encoding and decoding. We'll pass in a base string argument for the argument 1. This could be a concatenated value such as an address from two different fields, or it could be a single field such as a URL, which is what this example provides in the demo. The second use of the function is decode. So here we see we have the URL encode decode function passing in this case, the port for the encoded URL string, and then we're passing the second argument for decode. Notice that the spelling or the uppercase, lowercase for decode and encode do differ. Basically, the second argument just needs to reference a decode or encode. It can be all lowercase, all uppercase, or something like we have here, as long as the encode and decode is specifically spelled out. And both of these functions do return a string value. There is a limit on the return of the URL encode function, the URL encode decode function of, I do believe, 500 characters. The next is a random string, also referred to as the password generator. This function will return a string. However, there is a glitch within the Informatica custom functions utility which does not accept a string and return a string parameter if there are no port objects passed into it. So this is really a true random generated function, and it is not taking an input port for any of its arguments. Therefore, the return data type here must be integer. The same will go for any of the random generated functions, such as the GUID generator. Let's take a look at the random string function. And as we can see here, we're passing in 3 arguments. The first argument is the length of the string to be spit out by the function. The second is the use of numbers. So as a default, and if you reference the user developer guide for this function, the second argument will include numbers within the random string generation if this is set to 1. If it is set to 0, numbers will not be included. The third argument is for special characters. If this is set to 1, then the random string will generate special characters included with alpha characters. If this is set to 0, then no special characters will be included in the random generated string. So for example, if argument 2 and argument 3 were both set to 0, then your random string would only contain upper or lowercase alpha characters. Please reference the user developer documentation for more information there. The GUID generator, which is our most popular function, generates a globally unique identifier as well as following the universal unique identifier standards. This is a true random generator function within Informatica, brought to you by FyghtSoft. This function accepts no parameters, and it will clearly spit out a GUID as a return string. But do notice again that your data type must be set to integer. This kind of goes against standard convention. However, you will encounter an error if this is not set as an integer, and surprisingly enough, using the output port for this GUID generator will and can be used to point to a string for your target with no problem and as intended. And the very last one is a checksum generator. You might have heard of CRC or MD5. What we're doing is something quite different. The checksum CRC encoding function can take between 1 up to 50 different arguments in order to provide a check based on columnar input to determine if a row is changed. This is very useful in slow changing dimensions, etc. In this example, we're only showing 2 arguments. However, as I mentioned, this can accept up to 50 arguments, and if any more are placed into the checksum CRC function, they will simply be ignored. This also returns a string, which should be unique based on each row, and that can be verified and checked whenever you're testing or even through this demo process. Well, that concludes this quick start on a review of the functions provided with the version 1 release of the Premier Functions Toolbox.